Welcome to the UFO Woman Show. I'm your host, Melisa Kennedy. And on today's show, I have a very special guest. Not only is he a friend, but he is also a very popular person in the UFO community. Perhaps you've seen him on a very interesting TV show that I've been watching for years on History Channel called Ancient Aliens. It is by far my favorite alien show that's on TV, besides mine. But it is really good. I think it's really opened my eyes as well as others to the idea of aliens that have been present on Earth in the past and in the present. So please help me welcome my special guest, Mr. Nick Pope. Hi, Nick. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's great to be on your show.
Great. Welcome. So excited to have you on here today. Let's talk a little bit about how you got involved with Ancient Aliens. I know that you were working with the British government, doing UFO investigating. Can you bring our audience up to speed as to how did you get this position at Ancient Aliens?
Well, I had, as you say, worked for the British government investigating UFOs at the Ministry of Defence. And then the British government started what turned out to be an 11-year program to declassify and release all its UFO files. And they actually found a couple more just last week. We can get into that.
Oh.
But because they had asked me to come out of retirement to help this program, to help promote the transfer of these files from the Ministry of Defence to the National Archives. Obviously, my name was all over these files, and because I wrote a lot of them and I worked on them. So TV producers got to hear about me and thought, my goodness, here's a chance to get someone on the show who's actually done this not as a private interest or as a witness, but someone who's done it officially for the government. So they reached out to me, and back when the show started, of course, it's been running 10 years now, but I lived in the UK, and since 2012, I've lived here in the US, and of course, it's much easier for Hollywood and the film and TV industry to work with me. Now I actually live in the US. So I started that association with Ancient Aliens, and in the last couple of seasons, I guess, I've been on the show probably more in the last 2 seasons than in the first 10.
You're
and
in every show.
Yeah, and I think it's great. I mean, obviously, I'm not an expert on the ancient side of it. So when they do the stories where they go to Egypt or wherever they're going, obviously people like Giorgio Tsoukalos and David Childress do it. But increasingly, of course, they're looking at some of the more modern aspects of this, and there's no getting away from the story of the USS Nimitz UFO encounter, the Pentagon's ATIP program. So they bring me in particularly for that sort of thing, anything with the government angle, basically.
Right, and I definitely want to talk about that today because there's some very interesting stories behind all that, and I know you have some insider information, so I definitely want to talk about that. So your journey with Ancient Aliens started about 10 years ago when the show debuted. Out of that, you've really blossomed into, our favorite, one of our favorite alien experts and UFO experts. And, you've written a couple books. I know you have some, I know you got some DVDs here. This one's called Aliens at the Pentagon, and that's really good. And then you also have an Indistinguishable from Magic. Can you tell us a little bit about your DVDs, your books, and things like that?
Sure. Well, Aliens at the Pentagon is a personal overview of the Pentagon's ATIP program. Now, I didn't work on that, but of course, having run a similar program in the UK, I can, I suppose, give a sort of insider's view into how and why governments investigate UFOs and sort through some of the fact from the fiction. So obviously, just over 2 years ago, when the New York Times broke the story of the existence of this secretive Pentagon program, it was called ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, and of course, very, very clever didn't mention anything about UFOs in the title. So it was all but impossible for anyone to stumble across if they were using the Freedom of Information Act. So Aliens at the Pentagon is really my personal take on that story, and it's a very complex story. So I guess it takes me about 70 minutes to try and untangle what's going on in terms of the personalities, the issues, and of course, the story is still unfolding. I mean, literally almost every week, new information comes to light.
Right, right. Well, September of this past year, 2019, we did have some disclosure. We had some confirmation there. Do you foresee here in the new year, 2020, do you foresee any more disclosure, reveals, anything like that you're going to predict for the new year?
Absolutely, yes. We know, for example, that at the moment, 3 separate congressional committees have been looking at, for example, the USS Nimitz UFO incident from 2004 and associated incidents. There's a whole range, of course, of these encounters between US Navy jets and UFOs, and that's what led the Navy last year to issue guidance to their own people, telling them what to do if they encounter these things. The Navy confirmed that guidance had been issued, but of course they refused to say what it said because it's classified. But 3 separate congressional committees, the Armed Services Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, and the Intelligence Committee, looking into different aspects of this. So I think we're going to see some movement there. Although, of course, there are 1 or 2 other things politically going on at the moment, but we won't go down that road.
Just a little bit, right?
Just a little.
A little.
So that's one prediction. We're going to see further congressional movement. Whether that's formal public hearings or not, I don't know. But clearly, with 3 committees having looked at this, something's going on.
Yeah.
Also, what we're going to see as well, I predict, is these were a massive series of incidents, and we're going to see, I'm sure, more of the pilots and the radar operators and the intelligence officers who were involved with these programs to investigate all this and the incidents themselves. We're going to see more of those people coming forward, I think, this year.
And we brought up the fact that we've had Navy pilots give disclosure. I mean, what better eyewitness than a Navy pilot? They're trained, right?
Absolutely, yes. There's always a debate to be had, and in strictness, of course, there is no such thing as a perfect witness. Everyone can make mistakes. But 2 things. Firstly, as you say, Navy pilots generally, for example, have a much better idea than say, someone like myself. If they look at an object in terms of judging its distance from the observer, judging its height or relative position for the aircraft, and judging its speed. But of course, the second point related to that is we're in a fortunate position here. We don't just have the pilots say so for all of this. Mm-hmm. We have radar corroboration.
True.
These objects were tracked. And of course, most famously of all, we have certainly in 3 cases, and there are more out there, I know, we have these forward-looking infrared camera videos, because the FLIR system was mounted on these F-18 Navy Super Hornets, and of course we've seen the films.
Right. Well, when you were working with the British government, would you consider, when you were investigating, would you consider, the Navy pilots or just pilots in general, would they be one of your more credible eyewitnesses, would you say?
Yes, very much so. We received about 200 or 300 reports each year, though actually in some years it was nearer 700 or 800. So of those witnesses, yes, the ones where we tended to pay more attention were police officers, military personnel, radar operators, and pilots. So those 4 categories of people we probably gave more weighting to. But that's not to say we dismissed everyone else. Far from it. We investigated every single case.
Gotcha. Well, that seems like a lot of cases in a year. You said 400, 500, 600 sometimes. That seems like a lot. I know this past year in the United States, we've had just over 500 reported and investigated sightings. I really think that number is going to go way up this year. I think we've got a lot of interest right now in, nuclear weapons. I know that in history, we always have an increase in UFO activity around nuclear sites. Talk to us a little bit about, why do you think that is, and what has been your experience with nuclear weapons, nuclear sites, and UFO activity?
Well, I'm afraid we're even though I retired, took early retirement from the Ministry of Defense in 2006, of course, my secrecy oath, my non-disclosure agreement binds me for life, and I can only discuss those aspects of all this that have been declassified and released.
Okay.
I'm not a whistleblower, so I'm afraid we're skirting. Yeah, we're skirting here dangerously close to territory that I can't really discuss.
Gotcha.
So all I can really say on that is, yes, I absolutely take your point. I'm aware in the literature that there are a number of cases where it's alleged that that's happened, but really, this is an area that I'd rather not get drawn into.
Gotcha.
With apologies.
No, that's fine. And for me, and I think probably for the general public, it's kind of common sense to think that, if they are looking out for our best interest, they don't want us to use nuclear weapons because, let's face it, it's going to ruin our planet. So for me, I'll finish that sentence for you. I will say, Melisa Kennedy will say that, hey, we don't want you to destroy your planet. We are going to look out for your best interests, for your future, and therefore we're going to shut those babies down. And I think that's a good way to just kind of end that question. So let's talk a little bit more about some of your projects that you have going on, your book that took place in Rendlesham Forest, and I know that you've got your Indistinguishable from Magic DVD. You have a lot of stuff out there that if people wanted to learn more about you, about your research, about everything that you're involved in, they have a lot of options here. So let's talk a little bit more about what you have.
Sure. Well, let's just to go on to the second DVD. We discussed aliens at the Pentagon. So Indistinguishable from Magic is the other one, and I borrowed the title from a very famous quote from the science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke, who once said that any sufficiently advanced technology will be indistinguishable from magic. And it struck me that in a universe nearly 14 billion years old, if there are other civilizations out there, the chances that we'd stumble across one, say, 50 years ahead of us, seem vanishingly small. With those cosmological time frames in mind, it seems to me that if there are other civilizations there, we might find there are ones millions of years ahead of us. And so that prompted the question, what would those societies, those civilizations look like, and what would their tech look like? And the answer is, of course, it would be indistinguishable from magic. So I get into some of that, and some of the, I think the UFO community often get very focused on disclosure. When will it come? What will it look like? To me, the more interesting questions are the ones that come from the kind of, okay, well, that's fine. What happens next? And Indistinguishable from Magic gets into some of this, because if we do,
like a post-disclosure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, if we get into this, clearly, every aspect of human society will change: politics, religion, economics, science and technology, philosophy, personal worldview, paradigm, etc. Everything will change. So Indistinguishable from Magic is really a deep dive into some of that.
And I agree. I mean, when you stop and think about, just look at what we're doing right now. We're going to Mars. We're trying to expand our space program and go out into the universe. And if you just think about it for a minute, as we go and we visit other planets, let's say that we were to run into a civilization that was less intelligent than ours. Well, what would that what would that civilization think of us? They would think that we had magic. So it makes sense that in ancient times, they did not understand our technology. It was misunderstood, the technology of the aliens. And it would make sense to call it magic, or whatever word you want to throw out there. So would you say that that's a fair assumption, that as we go out and explore the universe, that we may encounter some civilizations, some beings that could maybe view us in the same way?
Yes, I agree. I think the Copernican principle suggests that we'll be somewhere in the middle. It's statistically unlikely, if we live in a crowded universe, that we will be the oldest and smartest civilization in the cosmos. It's equally unlikely, I think, that we'll be the youngest emerging civilization. So the chances are that if we share this universe with other life forms, there'll be some civilizations much more advanced than us, i.e. indistinguishable from magic, and others less so. And yes, if we encounter those, if other civilizations have, for example, a concept of religion, who knows, they may worship us as gods. And of course, in reverse, that's one of the central premises of the TV show Ancient Aliens, the idea that if we were visited in the past, those extraterrestrial visitors would have been perceived and perhaps worshipped as gods.
Right. I'm totally on board with you on that. I agree 100%. So I love the episode of Ancient Aliens. It was in the previous season, not your new season that's out right now, but the one that came out a week after UFO Con in November. Remember, you told us about it. You said, hey, wait till you see this episode, Disclosure. It was fascinating. You were spot on. You exactly hit it right on the nail. I love the fact that you were having this conversation with Tucker Carlson. I love that he is really front and center of trying to get this out in the media. I think he's done a great job. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that episode? Because I think it was a really good one, probably one of my favorites of all times.
Sure, thank you. Yes, I think the episode was titled Countdown to Disclosure, and it was, obviously it focused on the Pentagon's ATIP program, the Navy jets encountering UFOs, the associated congressional interest. But yes, very much, I think the centerpiece, the highlight of that episode was this great scoop that we got, this great coup where I interviewed Tucker Carlson. And it was interesting. Tucker Carlson is one of the mainstream media figures who has really taken a lead in promoting this. And if anyone watching thinks, it's not a political issue. I've been on CNN probably over the years just as much as I've been on Fox. It's just a question of personalities. A few years ago, Larry King on CNN took an interest in this, but at the moment, there's no getting away from the fact that shows like Fox and Friends, and particularly Tucker Carlson tonight, Tucker has really blazed a trail here and been a champion of this subject. And of course, famously, he accompanied the President of the United States on his historic trip to North Korea.
Right.
And during the interview, he asked the President about this issue. Now, normally, when presidents get asked about UFOs, if the question comes up at all, it's usually after they've finished their term.
Right.
And they usually dismiss the whole thing on a late-night chat show with a humorous
laughter.
reference.
Right. Oh, but Tucker just went in. Exactly. Tucker just went right in and just asked the question. I loved it. It was great. Now, his answer, Trump's answer, was a little neutral, I thought. What was your take on that?
Yes, it's very interesting. In fact, President Trump has given 2 interviews where he's discussed this. And if you really analyze his remarks, it's quite interesting. He makes a point of saying he's skeptical. But then he went on to say, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the quote in front of me, but people can check this. It's words to the effect of, he said, our great pilots are seeing these things, and they would know, and there seems to be something a little different this time, and we're watching. So that's really interesting. You bear in mind that 2 years ago, if you had asked the US government for a position statement on this question, they would have said, nobody's interested, and no official investigations are taking place. Now we have congressional committees looking at this, senators who've gone on the record to say that they've received classified briefings, and the president has said, yes, I went to a briefing on this, we're watching. So, my goodness, new territory. But just to finish your question, Tucker Carlson had interviewed me 8 times on his show. So we thought it would be a fun dynamic to flip things around and have me interview him.
Yeah, switch the chairs a little bit.
Yes.
It was good. I loved it, Nick. That was such a good show. Like I said, probably one of my favorites. I love that you switched positions for once. You weren't the one being interviewed, but you got to be the interviewee, and that was really cool. It was nice to see you switch places for once. And you did a great job. And I thought Tucker, I actually had the thought that if disclosure was going to happen, I don't think it's going to come from a president. I don't think it's a position that they want to put themselves in. It's kind of a no-win, because if you're that guy, let's say it's Trump, for example, if you were that guy that's going to be the disclosure president, that's really what you're going to go down in history as being known as. Forget about all the other stuff you did. That's going to be your legacy. Now, some people might be okay with that, but unless you do this on the first day in office, I feel like you're really putting yourself in a compromised position, because then people are going to criticize and say, well, you knew this information, but you withheld it from us for a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. I don't know. I've had that thought process of who should be the perfect, who would that perfect disclosure person be? Military? Yeah, I think that would be a good option. But what about somebody like Tucker? Somebody that's neutral.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Absolutely. Or hey, I'll tell you here live and exclusive. I'll do it.
Yes, you do it. Yes, Nick. There we go.
but yeah, you make a good point. No, somebody I'll do it. Tucker Carlson could do it. Maybe a well-known scientist like Michio Kaku.
There we go.
Could do it.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
Has to be a neutral person. It can't be politics necessarily, because I think that's really going to muddy the water. I think, for the last 70 some years, there's been all of this cover up, and anybody that is in office, I think you're setting yourself up for a disaster. You're just, I don't know. That's just my personal feeling.
No, you're right. You're right. It's one thing to discover extraterrestrial life and immediately make the announcement, and then you go down in history. But you're quite right. Anything else, and it doesn't take very long before the follow-up question comes in. Well, how long did you know about this, and why have you lied to the American people about it?
Yeah, so, you're going to be digging a grave right then and there. It's not a good situation to put yourself in. That's just my opinion. But yeah, so I don't think it's going to be a president. I don't care what anybody says, what they campaign with. Oh, I'm going to be this and that. I don't think you can be. I really, really don't. I don't think that's a position that anybody really, truly wants to put themselves in. And then I think about this, Nick. When you're a president, that's just a temporary resident in the White House. I mean, 4 years, 8 years if you're really lucky, but let's say 4 years is going to be your term. Well, are you wanting to disclose all this inside information that you've had for the last 70 years to somebody that's only going to be there for 4 years?
Sure. A president will serve, as you say, 4 or 8 years, whereas some of the deep insiders in the Department of Defense and anywhere else in the military and the intelligence community and government, you'll be dealing with deep insiders who have been versed in all of this for 40 years. Exactly.
So I get it. Like, I understand it's a real predicament. It's kind of a no-win situation. So that's my prediction. That's my thought process on, who's that person going to be and why. So yeah, I think it should be you, Nick. I vote for that. I vote for that. So, this year, what all do you have coming up? You have, obviously, Ancient Aliens just started this past week. Great show. First show I liked seeing David Childress. He's going to be at UFO Con along with you in April. So that'll be great to see you guys. And, what else do you have going on? You got some other things cooking right now that we don't know about?
Well, I'm continuing doing a lot of filming for Ancient Aliens, and that's a mixture of sit-down interviews where I do a deep dive into various subjects and field shoots. They're asking me to go out and about and to do some of the interviews myself. And as we discussed with Tucker Carlson, I like actually getting out of the studio sometimes and being the one doing the interviews. I can't talk, of course, about what is yet to be broadcast, but what I can say is that we have some really great thought-provoking interviews and episodes coming up. So I'm continuing to do that. There's another show out there called Unexplained. Mm-hmm. That's the one which is executive produced and fronted by William Shatner, of course. And I have done some of that, and I've got some upcoming filming with that. I don't think any of my interviews for that show have been broadcast yet, so that's coming up later this year. And again, I'm sorry to sound cryptic, but it's just the usual thing about you really can't discuss anything that the network itself hasn't decided to promote yet. But I have a lot of different TV projects coming up, so expect to see a lot more of me on television.
We like
and
that.
of course on not just documentaries, but when UFO stories break, I actually, of course, sometimes will be the person discussing this in TV news reports. And in fact, literally just yesterday, there was breaking news that my old employers, the Ministry of Defense in the UK, have located some more UFO files. Remember, I mentioned coming out of retirement to help with this program to declassify and release them. Okay. Well, a couple of times they've said, okay, that's all the files, and they keep finding more. So
interesting.
Yes. Early this year, hopefully it could just be a matter of weeks from now, more British government UFO files will be available, and I'm hoping, and I'm actually lobbying that they will be available free, digitized and online, so that anyone with internet access will be able to get them free of charge.
Nice.
So that's interesting, and of course I'm continuing every time some new story breaks about the Pentagon's ATIP program, the US Navy encounters. Sometimes the media will come to me and ask me, as somebody who's done this for the British government, they'll ask me to try and contextualize this, give a sort of insider's account of what it all means. And of course that story is still running. There are still further revelations to come. It's going to be a very interesting year, and we can discuss that, I'm sure, at UFOCon.
Yes, and we will. Well, you were covering Storm Area 51. I remember you and I were talking, and you were like, "Hey, by the way, I'm out here, covering that event." So that was neat.
Well, that was interesting too. I spent 3 days up around Area 51, interviewing everyone from event organizers, speakers, attendees, the local community, of course, who had concerns about this, some of the local cops who were policing this, and again, this was for Ancient Aliens. And I spent 3 days up there on a field shoot. The idea, I mean, this of course, it was one of the big stories of 2019, how this almost spoof comment became an internet meme and then became a major military and police contingency planning nightmare, really, with the thought that potentially tens of thousands, if not more, hundreds of thousands of people might descend on Area 51 and try to break in. A very bad idea, of course, for all sorts of reasons. In the event, of course, it's such a remote area, so difficult to get to, that really, I think it was closer to 10,000 people, but that's still pretty impressive. And
it is.
It's just an indication of how this subject has captured the media and the public imagination in a way that I really can't recall previously.
I agree with you. I think it definitely sparked an interest in the general public to force the issue of disclosure. And yeah, I think when the whole Facebook thing, when it was gaining popularity, I think it reached over 1 million people said they were going. I don't think they realized exactly where Area 51 is. I've been out that way. I know where it's at. And it's like, oh my gosh, people don't realize that you're in the middle of nowhere. So
yes, the nearest the nearest settlement to there is the little town of Rachel. I believe, according to the last census records, the population is something like 49. And so, of course, it was a major concern, because it's not like when they were worried about so many people descending on it, there's no gas station there, there's no grocery store.
Right.
So people were worried that people would get themselves into very difficult and dangerous situations, running out of gas in the middle of the desert, taking enough water.
Right. Yeah, it could have been a disaster. I mean, thankfully, it turned out okay, I think. I mean, you were there, but from what I saw of the coverage, it looked like it really wasn't anything tragic happening. I mean, it looked like it was well self-contained, and people had a good time, and that's good. I'm glad to hear that it didn't turn into some explosive, horrible event. So
no, there was really no illegality. I think there were a couple of arrests for public order offences, but mainly it was a very good-natured. It was almost like a festival, really, and that's interesting because. Yeah, it just showed again, I think, that this subject, and particularly it was refreshing to see a lot of young people out there celebrating. It was billed almost as a part protest, but mainly it turned into almost a celebration of people's interest in this issue and people coming together, bound together by this common thread of their interest in the subject.
Great. Yeah, I agree. Well, we have the last little part of the show here. I kind of would like to talk some more about ATIP. I know there's a couple other things that you wanted to touch on. So we have enough time that I think we can discuss those topics thoroughly before the show's over. So why don't you take us into some more information that you have about ATIP?
Well, ATIP, of course, was this mysterious Pentagon program, and they've tried consistently to spin this, even to Congress, as being about, as they put it, far-term aviation threats to the United States, which of course conjures up image of Russia or China. But when the Defense Intelligence Agency wrote to Congress about this, and I was the person who first obtained this letter from DIA's Office of Corporate Communications, but I got hold of the letter that DIA sent to Congress. It showed that while that was what they told Congress that the program was about, when they listed the scientific and technical studies that they had done about this, it was nothing to do with, I don't know, Russian aeronautical engineering kind of expertise, Chinese factory production, North Korean or Iranian ballistic missile aspirations or anything like that. It was all about, I mean, literally, it read like something out of a sci-fi movie: anti-gravity, invisibility, stargates, warp drive, wormholes, and the absolute clincher was that there was a paper on the Drake equation. Well, the Drake equation, as you probably know, is a theoretical construct designed to estimate how many communicable civilizations there are in the galaxy. If this was anything to do with Russia and China and next generation aircraft, missiles, and drones, why would you need to know how many civilizations there might be in the galaxy? Exactly. So clearly, that was a very interesting revelation. The other revelation, literally a couple of weeks ago now, is that for some time now, the Navy has said that these 3 videos that everyone has seen were unclassified. A recent Freedom of Information Act request to the Office of Naval Intelligence turned up the revelation that there is a another video out there classified secret, and that there are briefing slides classified top secret. Now, the definition, of course, of top secret is information the release of which would cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security of the United States. These are almost certainly the briefing slides that were used in, for example, the meeting that President Trump said that he attended on this. These are probably the briefing slides that were used when Mark Warner and Gene Sheehan, Armed Services Committee, Intelligence Committee senators, they said that they got this briefing. They came out of the briefing and they said, we can't discuss any of it because, of course, it's so sensitive.
Right.
But,
wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall in that briefing? Be interesting to know. Well, you brought up, Russia and things like that. What's your thoughts on our new Space Force that Trump just passed? What do you think about that?
Well, I know that the Space Force has generated a lot of rumors and conspiracy theories, not least because of their logo and the similarity with the Starfleet.
Yeah, I know. I looked at that, I thought, I think I've seen that somewhere.
Yes, I think I know that it started rumors, but I remember back in the 80s, of course, when President Reagan announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, the so-called Star Wars Initiative, and of course back then people were saying, oh, maybe it's got something to do with UFOs and how could we fight an alien invasion. My own suspicion is that the Space Force has far more to do with geopolitics and simply, as I know from my 21 years in the Ministry of Defense, only 3 of those years were on the UFO program. For most of the time I was doing what you might call more conventional defense jobs. There's no getting away from the fact that in any future war, there are going to be 2 key battle spaces, outer space and cyberspace. And obviously dominating those two battle spaces is very important. Hopefully not just in winning a war, but far more importantly, of course, hopefully in preventing a war through deterrence. So I think there are very good military reasons for a Space Force. And while I've seen the conspiracy theories there, I don't think it's got anything to do with extraterrestrials.
Okay. And do you believe that other governments are going to also follow suit and have a space program as well, a Space Force?
They're going to try, or certainly some of them will try. But of course, it's so expensive. These are such massive engineering projects that, frankly, there are only a handful of nations that could probably get in the game in any meaningful sense. And obviously, Russia and China are the ones that come to mind. But if you look at other nations around the world, some of the emerging powers like India and Brazil, Pakistan, Israel, other countries certainly have aspirations for a space program, and quite what they'll be able to do, I don't know. But it's going to be a very interesting few years, I think.
I think it will be too. I think the next 5 years is going to just be huge as far as the development of UFO knowledge, disclosure, Space Force, all that kind of stuff. I think we're about ready to get into an era of human history that is going to be unlike anything else that we've ever experienced. We've grown up with sci-fi movies and TV shows thinking that this was all fiction, and now it's fact. So who knows what's going to happen in the next 5 years?
Yes, and of course we have, it would be remiss not to mention that we have a new player in the game, or rather multiple new players in terms of the private sector. And what we're increasingly finding is that these venture capitalists, these tech billionaires, whether it's someone like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Richard Branson or Robert Bigelow, of course, who's deeply immersed in the UFO subject.
Right.
But the future of the space program may well not even be in the hands of government anymore, but in the hands of these private corporations.
Oh, absolutely. I know my husband and I went to Kennedy Space Center a few years ago, and, SpaceX was just everywhere. And it's really changed the whole genre of space exploration, having these private sectors in here. And, I kind of daydream about the idea of having like a space hotel and, it's orbiting Earth and we can go up there and stay. And, I don't know. I'm a sci-fi girl. I can't help it. I really would think that'd be neat.
It's coming. It's coming.
Yeah. So I got to ask, what do you think is on the moon? Got to ask.
Well, I'm not sure. Frankly, I'm not sure there's much up there. I know I hear all sorts of rumors, and I know that there are some people in the UFO community who believe that there's something there, whether it's our own bases on the dark side or maybe something extraterrestrial. I'm not at all convinced, but I think again it goes back to the point that we're on the very threshold now of a situation where not just other governments aside from the US, but private corporations, tourists even, are going to be up there.
I know, a resort. We could have some sort of a moon resort.
Absolutely. But look, it's getting to the point where if there's something out there, we're going to be finding it. So again, that's why I say exciting times.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, there's so many conspiracy theories out there about the moon. Is it fake? Was it brought here? Is it, does the dark side of the moon have alien bases? Do we have bases? I mean, there's so many theories out there. I love to read all of them. And to be honest, my own opinion is still, I'm still on the fence about it. There's still too much information that has not been revealed to us. There's not enough facts for me personally to make a conclusion one way or the other, but I do find it fascinating. And it's so close to Earth, but yet so far away. And, just the idea of having space exploration as a possible travel destination. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine.
Sure.
In my lifetime being able to go to the moon if I wanted to. But
well, it's definitely we're definitely getting to the point. And with all of these, you said that obviously, and it's true. There are so many stories, so many conspiracies, rumors, theories. In one sense, it's one of my favorite sayings. You don't have to prove a whole bunch of those things. You only have to prove one of them.
True. Well, I know that this coming weekend has some significance for us here at the UFO Woman show. My very first guest on the show was Kevin Briggs, and he has revealed to us some information that he received from some extraterrestrials through some experiences that he's had. And February 1st and 2nd, which is this coming weekend, and they have kind of alluded to the fact that maybe there's going to be some sort of mass sighting. Dr. Greer has actually declared Saturday, tomorrow, February 1st, as a global CE5 event. Kind of some interesting stuff coming up this weekend. Of course, we have Super Bowl Sunday, but it's as far as the UFO community goes, I don't know what's going to happen this weekend. Boy, it would be really interesting if something did happen, and then we'll have to get back on the show and talk about it, Nick.
Well, absolutely. And what could be better in terms of a mass event than perhaps a huge UFO sighting over the Super Bowl? That would...
Right here in Miami. Yeah, right here in the state of Florida.
Bring it on.
I agree. It would be interesting to see if anything turns out this weekend that in form of a mass sighting or whatnot. So let's go ahead and end the show. Let's talk a little bit about some recent sightings that's happened. I know a lot of media coverage has happened with the mysterious drones that they were seeing, the swarm of drones over Colorado. We've had some sightings of UFOs out in California. I don't know. What do you think about some of this increased activity of UFO sightings lately?
Well, I think it proves what I always say, that we can discuss this as much as we like, but at the end of the day, this is an events-led subject. And whether it's the thought that there might be some upcoming mass sighting, or whether it's these recent events that you discuss, all of this is as I say, it's we can only follow the developments that occur. And I think two things are happening. One, we may be seeing more big waves of sightings, but far more importantly, we are now, I think, in a situation, in an age where because this subject has now been discussed by the president, by various senators, Congress people, it's come out of the fringe and into the mainstream in a way that I can't recall in my time having been involved with this subject. And what I think that does is when you have witnesses who used to maybe feel that they didn't want to come forward because they'd be not believed, ridiculed, whatever. Now they think, well, heck, I've just seen the president talk about this, or I've just heard that there's been a briefing to senators, or I've just seen a pilot go on the news talk about this. And what that's doing is it's encouraging those witnesses to come forward and speak out.
Oh, I agree. I think it's definitely become more acceptable. I mean, I've been at the grocery store and people have come up to me and said, "Oh, you're the UFO woman. You know what? My dad saw a UFO, or I've seen a UFO." I mean, people are kind of starting to come out and they're not afraid to talk about this. And I'm going to attribute some of this to your show that you're on, Ancient Aliens, because you guys have really gone out on the limb here. So kudos to you guys and your producers and everything for really taking that first step into educating the public about these ideas that, up until 10 years ago when you guys first debuted, they were kind of just like subject matters of the sci-fi world. And, you had these little pockets of UFO, enthusiasts, I guess you could say, that would privately meet. And, I love Project Blue Book the other night, how they showed that little UFO meeting that they had in a barn, and it was the Ohio chapter, I think is what they called it. And people had to meet in private because it was such a hush-hush subject. And thanks to, shows like Ancient Aliens, us here at UFO Woman, there's a couple other shows that are really trying to get out there in the public and educate properly, trying to educate, get that information out there. I think it's really forced it into the spotlight, don't you?
Absolutely. And as I say, out of the fringe into the mainstream, and given a respectability that really it hasn't had before. And that's a very good thing. Let's have a serious debate about this. And much as I like sci-fi, let's not just dismiss all of this as a sort of joke about the X-Files, some funny lights, and then move on. Let's have a serious adult conversation with the American people and indeed the people of the world about this.
I agree. And in fact, I've even noticed an increase in UFOs and aliens in commercials lately. There's several big brands that are using UFOs and aliens. Now, for the most part, a little tongue-in-cheek kind of action. But nevertheless, it's still kind of getting more and more mainstream where, these brands are aligning themselves with a UFO or an alien. I think that's interesting because I think that's some more of kind of that conditioning, if you will, of our public into accepting that, hey, this is a real possibility. We in the UFO community know that it is. But for the people that maybe haven't been researching or haven't been following it, I think it's like a soft drip effect, a little disclosure, but a soft disclosure, if you will. Would you agree with that?
Yes, to coin a phrase that I think I invented, it's disclosure with a little d, not disclosure with a big D.
There we go. I love that. Disclosure with a little d. Nick said it here. That's great. I love that. So, as we get into this new year, we have more and more technology that's being used. I think I saw something online where you can get this zoomed magnifier for your cell phone. You can look at the moon. You can look at space. I mean, we're getting so many new little gadgets out there that I believe if anybody does see something, with our social media and everything with the internet that's just instant, we're going to get some information. We're going to get some unbelievable evidence. No more are we going to see these shaky videos and these blurred out pictures. I think we're going to get more and more quality evidence than we've ever seen before.
I'm sure you're right, and it's going to be the technology that perhaps is the key to understanding this. And as I say, we haven't got to prove a whole bunch of these cases. We've only got to prove one of them, and we're in game-changing, paradigm-shifting territory.
I agree. I agree. So, in closure, let's just let's jump down the rabbit hole for just a second. Let's say something does happen this weekend. Let's say there is a mass sighting that the UFO community is kind of buzzing about right now. Where do you see post-disclosure or perhaps post-mass sighting next week? What do you think is going to happen if that happens?
Well, those are some of the questions that I attempt to answer in the film Indistinguishable from Magic. I think there's a kind of, and I don't mean to be flippant with this, but there's a kind of soundbite answer to that. In some respects, everything would change. As I say, politics, religion, science, technology, economics, etc. But on the other hand, come Monday morning, as the old joke goes, does any of this mean I don't have to go to work tomorrow? And frankly, yeah, you do have to go to work tomorrow. So you will have to go to the grocery store.
Darn.
You will have to take the kids to school. So everything will change, and yet, in a sense, nothing will. Life will go on.
I still have to clean my house.
You do.
Yes,
you do.
Unfortunately, no matter what happens over the weekend, if there were some sort of a reveal or some sort of a mass sighting of UFOs this weekend, Monday morning, we still have to get up. I got to get my tea. I got to make my husband some hot coffee, and, we still have to go to work. We still have bills to pay, unfortunately, taxes to pay and everything else. But, I like your sound bite there.
Yes, you will be waking up to a different world, but you still have to live in that world and do the things that you normally do.
Well, it's interesting because I know there's quite a few conspiracies out there that I'm hearing, and I'm sure you're hearing as well. All of this political unrest, if you will, and things that are happening in the news right now, a lot of people are saying that that's a distraction, that actually... there's some more behind the scenes stuff going on, and this is a diversion, kind of like the Cold War diversion that we had with back in the 80s and stuff. Do you think maybe that's a possibility, or?
No, I don't think so. I think some of these conspiracy theories give the government too much credit. I mean, in my experience, people don't sit around like they did in the X-Files, some oak-paneled office, smoking cigarettes and sinister
Hollywood, yeah.
Yeah, I think that gives government too much credit, frankly.
That's an interesting statement. I tend to agree with you a little bit. We can't throw everything into that basket, can we? Because, we're giving too much credit, like you said. Well, nevertheless, whatever happens, if anything happens, we have a whole year ahead of us. There's so many things that could come out this year. ATIP, Space Force. I mean, who knows? We may find something on Mars that we finally get proof. What's your thoughts on Mars right now? Do you think we're going to inch closer to finding maybe some prior civilizations there, alien or whatnot?
I don't think we'll find any civilization there, but I wouldn't be surprised within the next 1 to 5 years if we didn't find evidence of microbial life on Mars, and perhaps indeed elsewhere in the solar system, specifically Europa and Enceladus have been mentioned, but who knows? Now, of course, there's going to be a debate. Is that really different life, or because we know that various material can pass between the planets as a result of comet and asteroid impact, we wouldn't be 100% sure that was genuinely new life as opposed to life that had the same universal common ancestor. But I think it probably will be fairly soon that we at least discover that, and then we can have that debate.
Right. Well, there's been some really unusual footage out there lately. I think there was live feed footage of the International Space Station that showed UFOs. I don't know if it was real or a hoax. I have no idea. But there's been a lot of stuff kind of out there recently of potential, proof of what's circling around the Earth, what's out on Mars and things like that. It's kind of interesting. I love to look at all that kind of stuff because I'm into it. But, for sure, we're going to talk more about this with you at UFO Con in April here in Orlando. Any thoughts on that? What are you preparing for, Nick, for UFO Con?
Well, I think it will be to update you and the attendees on the latest developments with ATIP, the Nimitz sighting, and the congressional briefings that are going on. And I fully and confidently predict I will have interesting and new twists to share with you by the time we sit down together.
Oh, I can't wait. That's going to be fantastic. And who knows what's going to happen between now and then? We may have even more information to share with you here on the UFO Woman Show and at UFO Con. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on the show, Nick. You've been wonderful as always.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So until next week, we are going to be waiting here patiently at the UFO Woman Show to see if anything happens this weekend. We have had quite a few, conspiracy theories and reveals that possibly something could happen this weekend. If it does, we're going to talk about it next week. But that does it for us here at the UFO Woman Show. I am your host, Melisa Kennedy. Until next time, keep looking up.